Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Ben from Universal Audio, and welcome back for another Luna Office Hours. It's a beautiful Wednesday afternoon over here, but thankfully, like all office hours, I don't have to do this whole thing alone. I've got the gang back together. What up? How's it going, guys?
What's going on, guys?
How's
Hey,
it going?
Ben.
Oh man, how you guys doing today?
Great.
Nice. Well, it's been a little while since we've seen the whole gang in here. We've been packing these shows full of people like Fab and Butch Walker on Monday. Man, that was a super cool session.
Yeah.
I let it go long because I was enjoying it so much. So hopefully all the viewers out there were enjoying it as well. But what a cool way to see his whole studio setup and how he's putting Luna at the heart of that. I think it was pretty inspiring to a lot of people to see how he's kind of created that whole music making system for himself. And I can fully confess that I have been building a similar template for myself in the back.
Yeah, I think rear view mirrors have gone up on the Amazon shopping list. You know, that was the coolest part.
Piano mirrors, yeah.
Yeah, piano mirrors.
Right. Yeah, it was such a cool setup. And then, on Friday last week, we had Corey Congilio, which was like a really cool masterclass in guitar arranging. And then also how he's able to get tones and everything happening inside of Luna. So yeah, man, it's been a packed week, and it doesn't end either. We've got tomorrow morning we have Greaves. If you guys have seen him and I did a video last year, I believe, of recording rap vocals. We were over at our actual studio for UA, and we kind of walked people through using the Voxbox and Auto-Tune and all those effects. So if you haven't seen that video, go see that. But most importantly, show up tomorrow at a special time, 10:30 a.m. PDT, nice and early. That'll be a really fun one. He's been playing around with Luna and making some new stuff, and he's got lots of questions for me. But more importantly, he's also got like a really cool production and track to show you guys.
Yeah, that video got a lot. People love that video, Ben. People really dig Greaves' vibe, and the way you guys worked with each other and showcase things like the Voxbox, which is I guess a little bit of a sleeper plugin, maybe, but definitely lots of people digging that video.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and dude, don't say if this is the first time you've ever heard the Voxbox somehow, do yourself a service and try it out, because especially on vocal, it's not just for vocals. It's obviously very tailored to being able to process vocals with the compression, the de-esser, the EQ on there. They're all perfectly made for doing vocals, but more importantly, you can actually you can use that on guitars or just anything that needs a really great sounding tube preamp mixed with a optical compressor and a Pultec style EQ. Like, how can you go wrong with those all together in one package? But great. So guys, the show is not just for us, it's mainly for you guys. So if you guys have questions, hit us up in the chat. Today we're going to tackle a bunch of user questions. Obviously, we're still getting thousands and thousands of people hitting the feedback button, which is awesome. Keep on doing that. Getting feedback is super important for us to be able to determine what features we add next. But also it kind of helps us know, even for these office hours, where what kind of hurdles you guys are running into. So we've been seeing lots of questions around input assignments, ARM mode, how does Luna and console, how do they work together? Especially so many of you, if you've been using Apollo for a long time, you're really familiar with using console now. We've done a good job of getting you into using console and mixing it with other workstations. So we've seen lots of questions of people asking like, all right, well, how do I do, can I do the same workflow I'm already used to, but just go into Luna instead of another workstation? And the short answer is absolutely yes, and the long answer is we're going to show you here in a few minutes. But before we get there, type your questions in the chat. We're all here to help you guys out. And I guess the first one, the one I wanted to show you guys, is probably one of my favorite features about Luna, which is the fact that you can have multiple tracks all using the same input, and they all remember the record effects, and they remember, so then you can go from channel to channel and still get the input path as you like it. Plus, I'm going to show you guys how to manage ARM with your sends and returns. So in this example, this is by the way, this is the little template I've been building up for my studio, similar to Butch's. similar in that I want everything all wired up, ready to go, ready to record at a moment's notice, including MIDI. And mine's got a lot more MIDI inputs and a lot more kind of routing stuff kind of happening in here, but that's not what we're here for today. I'll try and do a whole session on this at some point in time, either next week or the week after. But so we're just going to do this real simply. I'm going to use guitar DI. I've got this guitar here, this beautiful SG, plugged into the high Z input on my Apollo rack over there. And now my input is assigned to high Z2. And of course, because I was preparing for this earlier, I've already set up a channel for myself. So I've got a channel set up, ready to go. It's already got the Fender 55 plugin loaded up with my favorite settings, which are slightly different than the default. I don't know if it's good. I think it's a good thing, but I basically steal all my settings from getting to hang out on these sessions with with people like Jakir and Fab and Vance. So this is the Jakir special right here, the 57 and 67 combo on the Fender, both straight at the cone. I've seen him use this. I've seen him use this one multiple times in sessions, so that's how you know it's good. So great. All right. So this is a decent, kind of a clean with a little bit of dirt, depending on how much I crank this the Fender. But that's awesome. What happens if for the next take I want to do a heavy guitar? So I just hit Command Shift N to create a new track. Titled it Guitar Heavy with a nice typo in it. Come over here to my input and just assign that to high Z2. Now you can see, when I unrecord enable this track and now record enable this track, it comes up blank. That's exactly how I wanted it to. I wanted to be able to build a new chain here, so I can come in here and throw something like the Diesel in my unison slot, and maybe an LA 2A as a record effect. So now I can literally saw your ears off. Which I'm not going to do. I'm going to be nice. There we go. Killer. Oh.
Rock.
But of course, oh man, I forgot. I need to, track that second verse part with the clean tone. Hit record on my other track. And now we're back into the Fender 55. So this is to me one of the coolest things about working inside of Luna is that each one of these tracks remembers the settings that I had, and you can see it's adding those into DSP as needed, and then as soon as you unrecord enable, they're unloaded from the DSP. My meters go back down a little bit, and those resources are freed back up. But yeah, the real advantage here, man, is then I can also use that channel and come over here to my bass DI. And on this one, I've already got a MPEG SVT in 1176. Of course, this is obviously not a bass, but I can always just go right over to that track, record, enable, or input monitor, and it'll automatically load those settings back up.
And that thing you just said, Ben, that's super important, that DSP thing, the fact that Luna releases the DSP. If you're used to using console with another DAW, that's not always the case. If you're in a mix, you have to be careful about leaving DSP open in console. So for Aero users and Duo users, like that's a big increase in workflow for sure.
Mm-hmm, absolutely. And then so the other big thing about ARM mode, first thing to note is that you'll notice the tracks themselves. The meters are showing up here, but you notice it's no longer coming out of my main fader. That's because what ARM mode does is it connects the output of this channel straight to the monitors to give you its whole goal. The mission of ARM and the way it's working in the background to help you is its whole entire purpose in life is to give you as low latency of a recording experience as possible. And so, if you had to pass through, routing all these things together and passing through more plugins potentially on a main fader, that's where you start running into latency issues. But one of the things you'll notice, I've got an aux on here called Room. Notice how when I go into record enable, it gets grayed out. But, if I were to go, if I were to add in, say, some delay, that one's enabled, and you're going to ask yourself, like, what? But like, why would one of those work but the other not? Well, it's because over here, these are the aux return tracks over here on the right side of my screen. Notice how the delay and reverb both have arm in kind of this orange, but the room does not. That's because I've assigned these two, in terms of return effects, when you're in arm mode, you get two of them. So you have to pick your two favorite auxes to participate in the arm experience. So by default in my session, I've been using delay and reverb, but now I've added this room. If you want to use this reverb return, which I've got set up with like an Oceanway Studio, all you have to do is come over here, click on the arm button, and just assign it to one of your arm buses. And you'll see there's either aux 1 or aux 2. So I've got this one assigned to aux 1 on my delay, and now I've got my room reverb assigned to aux 2, and you can see that send came alive, and now I can throw this guitar. Now it's in the back of the Oceanway room, exactly how I wanted it. So those are kind of the two most important facts about being able to track, being able to quickly change tones, move from channel to channel. As always, hopefully you guys are already familiar with this if you've used console, but there's a difference. So unison and record effects, these are all committed. So when you press record, these are recorded. You're going to live with these settings for life, just like you would if you were, miking up a guitar amp and plugging it into a hardware preamp into a hardware EQ. This is basically your hardware equivalent of everything that you do before hitting tape. Then you hit tape, which is, again, part of the ARM process, is it will bypass any tape machine that you have loaded in here. You're not monitoring through this while you're in a record mode when you're using ARM. But again, this is just like real life in a big multi-track studio. When you're tracking to tape, you don't listen off the tape as you're doing your basic tracking. You are recording to tape, but you're listening off of the console faders, just like we're doing here in ARM mode. But of course, each channel has inserts. So these are your monitor inserts, which allow you to add plugins and monitor through these all in real time. And I'm definitely, we've mentioned this a couple times, I think, in office hours, but we've seen plenty of notes of people asking like, hey, I thought Luna supported AU plugins. Where's my Fab filter? Where are my waves? Like, where are my other plugin manufacturers? Why is it just Universal Audio? Well, that's because in ARM mode, only DSP plugins, only UAD plugins give you the ARM experience. They're the only ones that you can load in a DSP inside of Luna. But all of your third-party AU plugins, as soon as you take it out of record, now I can come back over here, search for my Fab Filter plugins, and continue on my merry way for mixing purposes. And once again, if I come back to this track and want to record again, hit Record Enable, automatically loads the Fender 55 I had, bypasses the tape, lets me monitor through my 1176, but bypasses the Pro Q3, exactly as I wanted it. So yeah, that's, hopefully you guys are getting this workflow and seeing the benefit here of being able to go from track to track and use the same input for multiple sources, and be able to build, these signal chains that are saved with your session. So I can come back to this months later and just plug my guitar into the front of my Apollo, get the same exact tone as what I had right now. Nice. Cool. Any questions coming down on that one, or is that, hopefully it's pretty self-explanatory?
Yeah, I think that was all clear. Just to kind of add to that, you mentioned how when tracks are in ARM mode, the AU plugins won't show up in the inserts.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen it come up in the chat a couple times too, where people were trying to load mono plugins on stereo tracks,
Mm-hmm.
and don't see the mono plugins in the inserts there as well. So if you're going to load a plugin and you don't see it, that's another reason why it could be double check the plugin's the same format as the track that you're loading it on.
Yeah, that's really good note there. And Matt, this is a real time question for you. Is it say I wanted to use a stereo delay on this guitar, but I didn't want to use it as a send return? Can I create a stereo guitar bus, route it into there, and still have it pass through this if I put it into ARM mode?
I believe the ARM mode on buses will only work for like aux sends. So from the send section, I don't believe it'll work for the output.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, that's what I'm seeing here
that's
too.
The case.
Yeah. So even if you ARM enable this track, it's still gonna go straight to the monitors rather than sending it through this bus. So yeah,
And that's because the outputs of Luna's mixer are on the native side of things. So when you try and send something to an output, it's ARM will disconnect it from that output because that's in the sort of native side of the app.
Which makes sense.
Exactly.
Great, awesome, guys. Well, yeah. So that's a really kind of quick run through of how the ARM tracking works. And this, of course, a lot of these examples we've been showing you guys with like single tracks at a time, but I know when we were down in LA with Jakir and Cass McCombs, doing a big tracking session, we had 24 tracks of inputs all working at the same time for drums, bass, guitar, like everything all rocking at once. So yeah, for even like big heavyweight multi-track sessions where you're combining unison plugins and hardware preamps and hardware effects and record effects, it was literally, he threw everything he had that we had at the studio. Everything was being used at some point in time for that session. And that was the whole idea, was to be able to really kind of push Luna to its limits and see how it could handle a really heavy duty session like that.
Cool.
Nice.
So Ben, you want me to show that sort of the alternative workflow to kind of what you were just showing?
Exactly. Yeah. So what you're going to show is something that if you've been using Console and Apollo before, what Drew's about to show you guys should look and feel very, very familiar.
Yeah. So as a counterpoint to what Ben just did, I'm gonna, we've been getting a lot of people wondering about how do I use, if I'm used to using Console and I maybe have a lot of sessions saved, from previously, how do I still use my stored Console sessions with Luna? And so I have a simple demonstration here, but this scales outward as you would expect. And what we're talking about here is this up here in the transport, we've got this thing called console tracking mode. And the easiest way to think about console tracking mode is that it's sort of, it breaks the connection between Luna and Console, and it'll keep Luna from overtaking channels in Console. And there's times where you might want to do this. So for example, again, I have a simple example here, but imagine I recalled a session that I had a bunch of inputs and mic preamps and stuff. And in my case, I just called up something simple that just had a couple of unison preamps, and that's basically it. And since I'm in console tracking mode, when I come over to a track and I arm it and it has that input, right? In this case, input mic 15, then it will respect Console's settings and use them as it sees fit. So, and if I recall this other, the track next to it, it will do the same thing and it will call up those settings that were there. And so unlike what Ben just showed, where the same input could potentially have different settings with console tracking mode on, that can't ever happen because Luna will respect the corresponding channels in Console. So for those of you that are wanting to use your old Console sessions, launch Luna, launch Console, put Luna in console tracking mode, recall your session, set your inputs to correspond to those Console channels, arm your tracks, and you'll have that same workflow that you're used to, and that'll allow you to keep using those sessions that you had done previously.
Nice. So, and it's kind of cool because it's kind of the best of both worlds, right? Because you're still getting the same workflow that you've been used to, but instead of just going into Pro Tools or going to Ableton or Logic or Cubase, where you're just Console's kind of happening magically in the background, it's actually kind of pulling it into part of the Luna workflow, so you can see and you can make changes all in one place while still having the reliability and the recallability of an entire Console session.
Yeah, it's really great for sessions like if let's say you're doing background vocals and you're stacking vocals, stack, you're quadruple tracking and so forth, and you just want that channel in Console to just stay on that mic, stay on those settings as you make tracks, and as you build up the as you build up your background vocals. You don't need Luna to be saving a customized channel for every track you do. You just want it to feed that same thing kind of in that old way. So it's really good for transitions for people who have all those sessions, but it's also good for people who have those workflows. So nice.
Awesome. I saw a good question come in. Someone's asking about shedding some light on the changing sample rates within a session feature. So say, in his example, it was like recording at 96, but then mixing at 48. And absolutely. So
This is
Not,
one of the most this is one of the most genius things that Connor and those guys came up with, if you ask me.
it truly is, man.
Yeah.
So Luna's timeline, I mean, just Luna sessions in general, it's completely sample rate agnostic. It doesn't care what sample rate your source files are. You can mix and match. You can have 88 next to 48 next to 96. It's all up to whatever you want to work at. And it's, so the long and short is that your sample rate is controlled by your sample rate down here. So I'm not going to do this because if I do, it will totally hose up this entire broadcast. But if I wasn't doing this broadcast and I wanted to say track something in at 96, all I have to do is come here, press 96K, and now I'm recording and processing audio inside of Luna at 96. So the question here is, so what happens to all the audio that was recorded at 48? Well, Luna will work in the background. It can do sample rate conversion in real time. So if you change the sample rate, press play, it's going to play back. And you may notice your render meters going a little nuts. That's because it's rendering in the background. It's doing what it needs to do to commit to that new sample rate to lessen the amount that the rendering engine has to work. But in the meantime, the rendering engine is going to work really hard, sample rate converting in real time. And then, so yeah, it's kind of a seamless process in that sense. But the way I've seen a couple of people use this is they've done exactly what Jeff was asking in the question of recording the session at 96, tracking everything in at full fidelity, as high a sample rate as their hard drives and their computer can keep up with.
And half the latency. You go up to 96, your latency.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. True.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's even.
I love that for vocals. Yeah.
Oh yeah, so it's an even better recording experience. But it's obviously much more CPU intensive. So then when you go to mix, you can easily just knock it down from 96 down to 48. Work in 48. Craft your mix, make it sound how you want. And you can either commit to it and export and live at that lower sample rate, or you can also then at the end of everything bump it back up to 96 and do an offline bounce where we can take the extra time and cycles to really calculate everything at the higher sample rate. The long and short of it is just it's super flexible. It allows you to mix and match sample rates, allows you to record at higher ones, move down to lower ones, and it's kind of doing all this work in the background. And of course, you'll notice as you do things, your render meters down here in the bottom left of the screen, they may go a little bit nuts when you switch from one sample rate to another, but that's because it's doing the work in the background to be able to lessen the CPU load in real time.
And for those of you that might be worried about this, I asked Connor about this specifically. And so if you start at 48 and go to 96 and then you go back to 48, it goes back to using the original files. It won't.
Nice.
In other words, your audio is not being sample rate converted multiple times in case people were worried about that. I know I was worried about that. And it keeps those original files around. That's part of the beauty of that database system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so. Absolutely. Good question, Jeff. Good question. Bus and aux, are they the same thing? I'm getting confused about auxes and buses.
I was just going to mention that one.
That's a really good one.
It's like interchangeable terminology, right?
And console versus Luna is a little bit different. So yeah.
Mm-hmm, yeah. Matt, you know the namings of all these things absolutely the best out of all of us, having done all the Luna basics.
Sure.
Yeah. So tell the people what they need to know about what's the difference between an aux and a bus, and why are we constantly interchanging these and confusing people?
Yeah, absolutely. So in Luna, everything's called a bus. In console, there are two aux sends. So kind of where it gets confusing is you can make a bus in Luna become an aux in console, which is what Ben was showing, where you click the ARM button and can assign it to aux 1 or aux 2. So when we're referring in this context, when we're referring to aux, we're referring to console, and when we refer to bus, we're referring to Luna. It can also get kind of muddied because aux is just kind of a general term for like a send effect, a send and return rather. So sometimes when people are referring to aux, they're referring to a bus in Luna that's set up in a send and return fashion. But yeah, like I said, in this contect, for office hours,
I don't think you helped, Matt.
Probably not.
I'm just kidding.
I think the old legacy industry standard naming still apply, don't they? In a way, like buses have always been the place where you pick up the signal, and aux has always been the thing where you send it off. So in Luna, we have something called sends, which is really what people probably would refer to in short form as an aux send, right? It's the send from the channel to the bus, and the bus is what picks it up. And then of course over the years, people have just in console terminology, they've called like effects returns auxes, and also like people just blur everything. But the bus is the point where it gets collected, if you think about that, and that could be subgroups or effects and anything.
Well, and the cool part about Luna, and the reason why this is such a blurry line, is especially like the way Luna handles that routing is, it's very similar. So when you click on add ascend here, you can see my guitar bus, delay, reverb, they're all showing up here as available buses to use as ascend. But those same buses are actually available to me if I come down here and try to assign the output. It's the same sort of thing, those same lists. So you can, it's great because then it allows you to, I could send to this guitar bus either as my output, or I can make my output the main and then send to that guitar bus using ascend. So that, it's the easiest way to think about it is it's basically everything in Luna is a bus. What are specifically auxes are what I was talking about with the ARM mode, where you specifically assign and you say, I want delay 1 to take over aux 1 inside a console, so that way I can monitor these effects with low latency. Great. How do you do sidechain compression in Luna? You hit the feedback button and you tell us how badly you want sidechain compression. So that's cheeky way of saying in V1 we don't have actual sidechain compression. Where you say, hey, this track feed this compressor. But we've shown this before. There's a couple of really great plugins out there. Something like LFO Tool that allows you, if you want the effect with something to kind of give you the sidechain effect, using something like LFO Tool or a Tremulator by Sound Toys allows you to get the same effect, which is sweeping up the volume, or a filter or something like that, and synchronize with the beat, and then you can actually get even more crazy and complex with it with something like LFO Tool, where you can actually draw. You can add extra points and you can draw different shapes, so you can get much more refined and much more complex about it. But it's not, I also realize it's not a full replacement for what a lot of people do use sidechain for, which is like, ducking or different processes like that. So to get that support, come up here, hit the feedback button, type a really a nice gentle message, of like, I would very much like to have sidechain support in my plugins, please. Pretty
please.
Yep. The nicer it is, the faster it happens, is a rumor I heard.
Attach pictures of dogs and cats to keep us happy.
Exactly.
And let's
actually,
take a minute.
That probably would bombard the servers.
Yeah. And let's take a minute just to make clear for people that this feedback button is not where you want to submit support requests, right? This is something else I've been seeing a lot online, where people are kind of mistaking that feedback button for customer support or for a way of don't expect a response. In other words, it's kind of a one-way street, and it's a way for you to share your feelings with the development team. But if you need support, don't use that feedback button. You want to go to our support portal. So I think that's something that we should say as often as we can.
Yeah.
For to save our guys.
Absolutely. Well, I saw someone here in the chat was asking about they're working with their aux. They're noticing latency when monitoring their aux in Luna, but they don't experience any latency when monitoring console. Why is that?
And in this case, we're talking about the aux amp top box.
Exactly.
not the other aux that we just talked about.
We're doing great at muddying up the aux waters, aren't we?
Right.
Hey, we're ensuring the fact that we're going to need another Q&A. So it's like, it's job security.
It's
right?
job security.
We're creating the queues. Exactly.
So I guess is a couple things to note about working with aux, and just to try and troubleshoot this super quick for you. If you're coming in digitally, which is how I have my aux set up. There we go. So I've got my aux left right, which is coming on the SPDIF port. Always make sure that you have sample rate convert on. The aux is a fixed sample rate box, so if your sample rate of your session doesn't match your aux, you'll get this weird digital stuff that isn't pleasant. So make sure you got that on. But my hunch is, real quick diagnosis, if you are seeing the orange box around inserts, that's how you know you're in ARM mode. You can also tell you're in ARM mode by the yellowness of this button over here. If I take this out, I'm now, I've turned off accelerated real-time monitoring, and I'm now I'm listening with a little bit of latency, potentially. without any real processing on this channel. There shouldn't be any, but yeah, I can still feel a difference. So make sure you have ARM mode enabled. Make sure sample rate converts on. Make sure you're seeing this orange box around your inserts. And that'll let you know if you are or are not in ARM mode. Because otherwise, yeah, it should react. There should be zero difference between how Luna operates and how console operates for your aux. Great. You guys are killing it with all these questions. This is amazing. Let's see. Somebody says that we're not answering their question. I'm trying to find what their question is. You guys see that one, Damien? Oh, audio bus and aux are the same. Oh yeah, Damien, we talked about that. We joked around a little bit about it, but be very clear. Buses and auxes are basically the same thing inside of Luna. A bus is a non-audio track, a way for you to move audio from one thing to another. The only thing that is specifically an aux is, if you're using any send return buses in ARM mode, those you'll have to assign to a aux 1 or 2, so that you can have reverb or delay happening in real time for your monitors. So hopefully we've now answered that as well as we can.
Another good question was, if you record at 96 and then switch the project to 48K, is all that extra information you captured when you recorded at 96 still there? And the answer is yes. If you change to a lower sample rate, you'll be hearing it at a lower sample rate, but you can go back to the original sample rate that you recorded at any time, and all that extra information that you recorded is still in your file.
Yeah, that's what I meant when I said it kept those original files. So your files aren't being converted and reconverted over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and I saw Mike over on the Facebook chat was asking about reducing latency when using an amp sim and effects. The way to get a no latency experience is to use a UAD amp, and make sure you're in ARM mode. So if it's a UAD amp simulator and you're in ARM mode, you're gonna have as low latency experience. That's awesome. If you take it out of ARM mode and you use something like Guitar Rig or a different Amplitube or any of the other guitar sims, those are now all processing natively, and you're out of the advanced real-time monitoring mode, which means that there's going to be a little bit of buffering, there's going to be a little bit of latency there, but that's kind of inherent with using fully native processes, and this is why we've put so much time, effort, and energy into creating accelerated real-time monitoring, and why we think it's such an important feature. It's also why we need DSP. People ask that all the time.
It's no different if you were in the middle of a busy mix and you needed your buffer at 512 or 1024, and you went to try and do that same thing. Then you would probably experience a similar thing with any DAW.
Mm-hmm, exactly. So yeah, that was a good question, guys. Great questions. Someone asked when the next version of Luna is coming. Sometime. Sometimes they're working super hard. So you guys know, we've had Connor and Lev on the show a lot of times, and it's always fun to bug them and ask them when 2.0 is coming. That team, they're working super hard to not only they've been focusing on bugs since we released, but they're now moving back into working on new features in addition to the bug fixes. And as you guys, if you've been with us from day one, you've already noticed we've done 2 updates since we launched on April 7th. Which is, that's fast, that's responsive, and it's squashed some of the biggest, most important to fix bugs. Have gotten that, and so yeah, that team, they're off working super hard right now to add more features, and there's trust us, there's no shortage of good ideas for things to add or to keep on tweaking inside of Luna. So that's a long way of saying we can't tell you when the next big update is coming, but know that we've got teams of people all working in the background super hard to continue to make Luna more and more awesome.
Ben, Eric in the chat had a question about bouncing stems. Do I print the inserts of the main fader as well? That's kind of a personal choice thing. I mean, there's two schools of thought there. Mm-hmm. One is that if you're bouncing stems, if you're going to reconstruct those stems later and apply your master fader processing to the stems, then no, don't bounce your stems through the master chain. If, however, you want the stems to be combined and be the closest approximation to your finished mix without any further processing, then you would do that. Keep in mind though that those bouncing individual stems through a master fader, you're still not going to get the same kind of reaction from the compressor or whatever. But really, the answer is kind of depends on what you're going to do with those stems afterwards. If you want to reconstruct them later with a master fader, you could do that without it. If you wanted to not do that, then you would print it with it. So hopefully that makes sense for Eric.
Well, and there's also an important little add-on to that is if you're using, export all tracks as files, which is a really great workflow for being able to send people things out of your Luna session. You'll notice up here in the sources menu, multiple sources selected. So when you're using this function, so if I were to bounce all of these individual tracks, it'll bounce these tracks with the effects on those channels. But it won't bounce like the sends. It won't bounce it with any master fader effects. Those, you can obviously come up here and have it also export your buses, and it'll export the result of the delay. So that again, if you were to export your tracks like this, where you're exporting your buses and your individual tracks, and you leave the effects on, you can bring that back into a session. Add some main fader effects, and you're back to exactly the same mix. But it's really important to know that if you are bouncing out this way, where these files are created from is from the output of wherever those are. So the output of my guitar DI track will contain all of these guitar effects, but it won't contain any effects that on the guitar bus, for instance, or on the main bus if I'm exporting just that one track. Awesome, great. Let's see, and hopefully you saw yesterday we had Fab on here. That was kind of our first chance looking at the Pro Tools to Luna workflow of being able to export an AAF file and bring that in to Luna. Fab, we touched on it yesterday, but I think we're gonna actually do one live in real time next Tuesday with a Fab, which would be really cool to see.
There were some cool tips in that, Ben, as well, about consolidating groupings and things like that, right? Removing region groupings and things.
Yep.
Good
Really
stuff.
Important. Rumback is asking, is there any way to delete old files from Luna's audio pool? There is not at the moment. So at the moment, Luna remembers everything. So every take you've done, even mess ups and stuff like that, everything is kept at the moment. We've definitely heard loud and clear that a lot of people would love, especially if you do a lot of tracking or you do like a big tracking date, or if work on a big song production, you've got lots of takes that you don't need anymore. We fully are hearing you guys that you'd like session management and file management capabilities added. So the more people that hit the feedback button and tell us that, the higher it goes on the priority list.
Yeah. There's a few other questions as well coming in about sample rates in the chat on YouTube. I'm noticing people talking about if they say they've recorded at 44.1 or 48 and then bring it into Luna and change the session to 96K. Is there any benefit to doing that? And the simple answer is yeah, like a really big benefit. I mean, if you can stomach the extra processing power required to run things at 96K, then a lot of your plugins, not just, for example, a lot of the UA plugins, but lots of the native plugins you use, the AE plugins, will also potentially have far better performance in the audible range up to 20K when the aliasing shifts beyond that up to 30, 40 kilohertz when you're in 96K for processing. So you actually might find mixing at 96, if you want to do that, will give you benefits just in the sound quality of the processing you apply. So it's worth checking it. I actually made the switch at the weekend to just kind of finally making the decision that no matter what I get sent for mastering, I'm just going to work at 96, run my analog gear at 96, and that way it's archived at 96 for mix downs, which is what actually a lot of the labels are requiring now for submissions. So that, if let's say in 5 years they go, oh, Apple Music, we're going to upgrade the quality to Apple Music plus or whatever they want to call it. They might decide to start streaming 96K files, so they want a high res version on archive. So actually, it's not a bad thing to try, and because Luna's sample rate agnostic, definitely give it a try and see whether you can hear a difference with some of your favorite plugins.
Yeah, and even your D to A. I mean, aside from what's happening in there, your D to A operating at 96 is going to sound better. So you'll hear things a little better, and you'll make little better decisions just on the D to A side.
The other thing as well is that even though it's a small difference, running at higher sample rates always makes things quicker in terms of latency. So regardless, even ARM mode will be faster at 96. So if you're recording, if you want the absolute, you know, the most sort of like liquid experience, the higher the sample rate, the faster the whole system. So
Yeah, that's a palpable thing. Yeah, it's a palpable thing. If you just put a mic into Luna and toggle that sample rate, you can feel it. You know, we've talked about this before, Tom, the whole idea of bone conduction and the internal sound getting there faster. It's a noticeable difference when you toggle that sample rate. You can feel it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, you might be talking, say, going from 1.5 milliseconds to 0.7, you know, halving it effectively. So, you know,
Yeah.
it is, I wouldn't say that's perceivable as such, but it's intangible, but it's certainly worth trying. But the real benefit is the processing, you know, giving yourself that bandwidth for the fact that you often have 3 or 4 plugins in a row on a track, you know, and those little things add up. You know, the beautiful thing with UA plugins, and actually this is part of the sort of, in a way, the secret sauce, right, Ben, is that a lot of our plugins have oversampling, and we have a really nice control over those sort of aliasing things you'd expect to find in a lot of digital processing, like non-linear distortion and things like that. But that's not true for everyone else. So by running Luna at higher rates, you might find your other plugins start to improve as well.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I saw a good question coming over on the Facebook chat here. Noel was asking if I can assign a guitar input to 2 channels to use 2 different amps. That's a fantastic question, and I don't know the answer, so we're going to find out right now.
I know the answer because I already answered them.
Oh yeah,
but I'll let you figure it out, Ben.
You let me. Well, the quick answer is no.
Drew knows.
Exactly. Oh yeah.
So are there any tricks that you can use to if you wanted to do something like that?
Well, you could, I mean, you know, you could split it in front of it. You know, like one of the things I do quite a lot with, you know, when I'm capturing stuff is I'll use a DI in front of, I'll go into a DI and grab that version of a signal and use the through to go into a high Z, so I can capture the raw DI and an amp sim at the same time. So I do that quite often with my radial DIs, which I love.
That's a good way of doing it. Yeah. So going into a DI box in its 1/4 jack throughout, going into your high Z on your Apollo, and then the mic out into a mic input.
Exactly.
Well, and then another way, you know, that I would think to approach this too would be if is I would actually, it's cool. I love that you can drag and drop stuff like this. So I could take, you know, say I didn't want to commit to this Fender 55 and I potentially wanted to have this track go through both of them. What I could do is for tracking purposes, pull it out of the unison slot, so I'm not committing to that Fender anymore, and bring it down here to the monitor inserts. So you know, you lose a little advantage that Unison has of being able to match the impedance characteristics to the original amp. But now what's
you could put a pedal. You could put like a tube screamer in there and bypass it, and still get the impedance matching, but bypass the pedal.
Dude, good call, Drew. Yeah. So by doing this, by putting in the tube screamer, turning off the drive on it, I'm now getting, it's reacting the same as if I was, you know, coming into this impedance wise. So my guitars are all seeing this as it is, but the signal that I'm recording now is clean. So if I were to record it on this track, I'd be getting a clean DI signal, and then I could simply duplicate the track and then change which amp sim I'm using after the fact. So that's a really powerful way to be able to track in a little bit cleaner than you maybe normally would, but then gives you the flexibility down the line to audition or try out different amp simulators. Yeah, it's a good tip. And it's fun learning things about Luna alongside you guys in real time.
Yep.
A few people were asking in a rebound on the sample rate thing, Ben, about 192. I think it's worth mentioning that using 192 actually changes some of the I/O capability of the Apollo, because it's running at such a high, elevated sample rate there that I actually wouldn't recommend going up there unless you're doing something where you've been specifically asked by a client, maybe a classical recording where it has to be delivered for archive. But I'd probably sort of experiment with 96 really.
Yeah, and Matt, you might know this. Matt, isn't in 4x sample rates, ARM is not compatible, is it?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that ARM's not available at 4x sample rates. So yeah, especially if you're playing VIs or input monitoring, 96 is a better option for sure.
It's a real edge case sample rate anyway. Like, I don't know anyone working up there, to be honest.
I've never even tried. Have you ever tried it, Tom? I've never tried it.
Yeah, I mean, I've tried it for like product designs and stuff like that. And obviously I had a couple of classical clients that do orchestral recording that do it, but it was very much at the specification of 1 or 2 major classical labels in the world really. But, you know, it's such an edge case recording situation. Those guys don't need like processing on the way in, it's like 5 mics, 6 mics,
Yeah.
and a 50-piece orchestra in a beautiful room, and they hit record.
But
That's
you don't run your first violins through Fender 55 while you're tracking live. Like, kind of orchestra engineer.
You've seen me. I just thought everything. I'd be up for it, but
So, hey Ben, we got a Facebook thing. Tommy's asking about getting the bus effects are not being streamed. They're doing some Facebook Live stuff, and this is something I've seen a lot of people having some issues with. Yeah, and I think one of the little tricks there is if you make an IO matrix that has inputs 1 and 2 as monitor left and right, then things like Facebook Live, which only see the first 2 inputs. Yeah, Ben, you want to show them that? Ben?
Yep.
Yes.
So yeah, it's important to have, and it sounds like you know a little bit more about what Facebook's looking for than I do. But yeah, so this monitor left right, this is what's important, right? So, but not this side of it, actually, right?
Yeah, it's on the input side, exactly.
The input side. This is something that I think is pretty unique to Apollo's, is that you can have a monitor output, but you can also have a monitor input. And this allows things like Facebook and other streaming services to access exactly what's coming out of your speaker. Like what's being sent to your speakers can also be sent other places. So what you're saying is that you'd assign this actually up here on your 1-2.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so, and I ran into this when I was helping Butch get set up. He had already kind of had his IO. He was just using a default configuration, so it just kind of cascades all of your inputs, all of your outputs for all your devices. As you'll notice in my IO, you can actually mix and match. So I can go from my first device to my third to my second. Like the order that you put these in doesn't Console and Luna, neither one of them really care where or how you have them, but certain apps like Facebook Live, they do care where you have them. So assigning this first one, and I'm using this as my summing return, but I could just as easily come in here and say I want that to actually be monitor left and right to move them up in the signal chain.
Yeah, and it's kind of counterintuitive, but you could have an IO matrix that only has mon left and right in input 1 and 2, and in console all of your inputs still work and they all feed the mon left and right, and the totality of that would feed your destination.
Wow. Dude,
so
that's a trick.
Even though you only have one thing in there, they actually are all active.
No way. And so I saw someone asking earlier if you could use Luna or console to like be mixing live. So in theory, then you could, right? You could take, so what Drew's saying is you can come into IO Matrix, get rid of because all this is telling is it's telling core audio. It's telling it's telling Pro Tools or Ableton or Luna. It's saying like, great, here's all the available inputs separated out for you to work with.
But it doesn't keep them from existing in console.
Exactly. So changing those around does not change what you can see here in console and what's available to you to mess with in here. So that's a huge tip right there. And it's also I really love that like you can save and recall different IO presets. So you can save one, especially if you're streaming for Facebook Live and you need that sort of configuration, you can make a Facebook Live IO configuration. It's just those monitors, and then you're coming into console using it to basically create your live mix. But then at the end of that session, you can easily just come back in here, call up your full IO preset, and you're ready to rock on other sessions.
Yeah,
it's actually one of my favorite Apollo features. Probably yours as well, Drew. Right?
What's that?
The being able to save presets.
Oh yeah. Well, it's one of the favorite features of Luna is I can use more than 32 channels of IO. Like for so many years, I have IO matrices that have that 32 channel limit when working with Pro Tools, but with Luna, you can you're able to finally see and use all of that IO. Yeah,
that is really nerdy, Ben, but that save presets is the thing that makes my room work. Without that, it's really hard for me to do what I do because I kind of have to flip between certain AES routing for the mastering side and then 32 IO for when I'm mixing. And without that and console being able to monitor my print back A to D, and have that as a low latency monitoring path for the capture of my like summed mix, without console and all those presets, I'd have to be crawling around like with an extra patch base for AES, for digital signals, which I don't need.
Yeah.
So it's super nerdy, but that feature alone isn't on so many other interfaces, and it's a real big enabler. When you need that feature, it's like a total lifesaver.
Absolutely. And again, it harkens to why working inside of Luna has there's a big advantage if you're using Apollos to be using Luna, is the fact that this all updates in real time. Like I can even come in here, I can say, I can rename my inputs, so that this input I've been demonstrating with today, it's number 20 here. So I had it labeled High Z2. So I just changed this name to Guitar DI. Now I come back into my session, Guitar DI. So the fact that like all these things kind of keep up with each other and stay in sync, and that all these settings are available to you, and it's such a big workflow improvement for me, honestly. Awesome. Somebody did ask about analog summing and how to set that up inside of Luna. We could probably talk about that for hours and hours, but Drew, do you have the short, easy answer?
Well, the first thing we should say is that you have to be careful with this because it's not technically a supported workflow. And the reason for that in version 1, and that's because not all IO are delay compensated in Luna version 1. It's hopefully it's something we'll get to, but it's not happening now. So you can do it. And the quote unquote trick is that Luna will compensate for the most latent output. And it'll look at the main outputs first. So as you build your buses and as you build your stems and then you send them out to the hardware, what you want to do is you want to make sure that you keep a high latency plugin like the ATR 102 is one on that master fader that will create a very latent pathway that then Luna will compensate the others to, or that they'll all fall into line. So if you're going to do it, just be careful with it and do that little trick by having a high latency plugin on the master fader. Is that what you were thinking of, Ben?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the other trick I've been doing for it as well is try to keep yourself organized in terms of your layers of buses. So this is my production template. I'm not setting it up necessarily to be able to do summing with it, but the trick that I would recommend is be very vigilant about your busing and your layers of busing. So I would recommend coming in and creating sub buses. So you have all your drums being bussed together, have your basses. So basically every audio track feeds into a bus before it goes to an output. So drums into this bus, and then I use this bus to then send out to my 2 bus. And then I would continue. I'm just going to do this super fast. Synths and stuff as another one. And then this one would be going out one of my other summing paths. So now that these are kind of all layered together, they're getting bussed together, and I have some control inside the box. And of course, this also gives me the chance to choose, Neve summing or no. But I can also, add effects or, tweak the trims before it hits the D to A and goes out into the analog world. It gives you this little kind of group control, which is really nice. But again, making sure you're kind of bussing together, using that bus output to send out to your summing rig. And then the important part is, then obviously how do you come back in? So for that, the way I've been doing is just setting up an audio track and this final audio track, which we can call like a summing return. You would come up here, assign your whatever input your summing is coming back in on, which for me is my convert AD. You can put it in input monitoring mode, and it'll just hang out there listening. You don't have to put it in record monitor. You can leave it in input monitor, and now this is listening to the result of my summing bus the entire time. And it's the only thing feeding that main fader. And then you got to follow Drew's trick, which is, put something that's highly latent like the ATR 102 on that main fader. And you can, I think you can just put it on through mode, and then it's not affecting the sound at all. But right. it's giving you that delay compensation headroom for this little workaround. Because the issue right now is that these outputs, using analog outputs out of here, are not necessarily delay compensated perfectly like they are using in the box routing.
Yeah, only the Qs and the mon left and right are delay compensated currently.
Yeah. So it's a little bit complicated. It makes a few things a little bit trickier. But yeah, if you've got an analog summing set up like a lot of us do, this is kind of the great way to get around that at the moment.
Well, Ben, what do you have you done? How much hardcore have you had a chance to do any sort of hardcore comparisons between Neve summing and your summing rig?
Uh,
I have a burl here, and I haven't actually done any hardcore tests. I'm curious if you had.
I haven't done any shootout tests. So the shootouts I've done like taking a mix I finished inside Pro Tools and in the box mix, and then brought it over to Luna in the box, and then adding tape and Neve summing to it. That's I've done that a couple of times for client mixes, but I haven't done any analog summing versus Neve summing shootouts for myself yet.
Yeah, I'm trying to carve out a little time to do that. I'd be really curious to do that.
I feel like our viewers would be really interested in hearing and seeing that as well.
Yeah, well, maybe with another office hours, maybe.
Heyo.
If we could do that one with the like gain staging, headroom, VU meter type of thing, because that's still really relevant when you start going out as well.
Yeah. We can definitely we can develop some content there for sure.
Yeah, that's an episode me and Drew can put some stuff together for, I think.
Absolutely, yeah. That sounds great, Tom.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, guys, this hour has come and gone. It's flown by super fast. It's been really fun answering all these questions. I know we've gotten even more questions kind of happening here in the chat than we're always able to get to. But hopefully I saw that we did solve some people's problems, which is really, really great. And
yeah, thanks to all the end users that are answering on our behalf as well. I've seen a bunch where like me and Matt are trying to type out answers and somebody's like beat us to the punch already.
They're fast,
Great.
yeah.
Shout out Dr. Voodoo.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
We see David and Danielle. Yeah, all the homies who day one Luna office hours homies right there. Really super happy to see you guys.
Our user base, man, they're awesome. Man. I interact with them on a daily basis, and they're awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. Great. Well, yeah. So, like I mentioned, tomorrow we're back at a different time. We're back at 10:30 a.m. With Greaves. That's going to be a can't miss session, especially if you enjoy hip hop production and rap vocals. Greaves and I are going to go over a little bit of everything. We'll be back, I think, Friday for another Q&A. So if we have questions that we didn't get to, we'll be back here Friday afternoon. Do a little happy hour, office hour Q&A time. Next week we've got Terry Lewis, we've got Fab DuPont, we've got Shakir King. It's
big old week next week, isn't it?
Big old week next week. It's gonna be super fun. So stay tuned for those episodes, and we'll see you guys back here tomorrow on the next office hours.
Bye, everybody.
Take it easy, guys.
Thanks.